My name is Amanda, and I'm 20 years old. I was just 16 when I started working at Joe's Diner. The smell of grease and burnt coffee clung to my skin like a second layer. Back then, life felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. My mom had just been diagnosed with MS, her body betraying her inch by inch. My dad, well, he'd checked out years before, drowning at the bottom of a whiskey bottle long before I even understood what abandonment meant. That left me and my little brother, David, who was just 10 at the time. He was too young to understand why his world had suddenly turned so cold. "Amanda, sweetheart," Mom would say from her wheelchair, her voice trembling as much as her hands, "you don't have to work. You should be focusing on your schoolwork." I'd just smile, kiss her on the forehead, and grab my apron. My textbooks waited patiently in my backpack, knowing I'd only have a few stolen moments between shifts to crack them open. Poverty wasn't just about empty stomachs or drafty rooms. It was the constant weight pressing down on me, suffocating me with every overdue bill and school expense I couldn't cover. I lived in fear of the phone ringing, bracing myself for another collector. Whenever David needed shoes, I made sure my portion stretched or disappeared entirely. Dad would stumble home late, trailing the stench of cheap booze. He'd glare at me from the kitchen doorway as I painstakingly counted out bills at the table. "You're just like your mother," he'd slur, always the same line. "Always worrying about money. Life's too short, kid." Then, like clockwork, he'd collapse on the couch, leaving me to clean up whatever mess he'd made this time. By the time I was 18, my life was a blur of exhaustion. Mornings slinging coffee and pancakes, evenings bagging groceries, weekends scrubbing strangers' floors. My grades barely clung to passing, but we survived. David was growing up. Mom's medication stayed stocked. Somehow, we kept going until the day everything fell apart. I was restocking cereal boxes at the grocery store when I heard it, a laugh. Not just any laugh, but my mom's. Only it wasn't the weary, pained chuckle I'd grown used to. This was light, full, and melodic. It didn't belong to the woman who sat in her wheelchair every day, apologizing for being a burden. Curiosity tugged at me, and I rounded the corner. There she was, standing. Yes, standing. Next to her was a cart overflowing with organic produce, imported cheeses, and wine bottles that cost more than my monthly paycheck. Her hair was styled, her clothes screamed designer, and her hands, steady as could be, plucked a $50 bottle of Merlot off the shelf. Beside her, my dad stood sober and polished, wearing a crisp suit I didn't even know he owned. "Don't forget we need more for the beach house this weekend," Mom said casually, tossing the wine into the cart. "The Hendersons are coming." The beach house? The Hendersons? My feet felt like they were glued to the tile floor. Just that morning, Mom had been in her wheelchair, apologizing for being such a burden. Now she was gliding through the store, like she owned the place. They paid for their haul with a gold credit card and packed it into a shiny black BMW I'd never seen before. I stood there in my threadbare sneakers and stained uniform, watching as they drove off, laughing like carefree teenagers. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go home. I ended up at the park where I used to take David when life felt lighter. My phone buzzed with messages from Mom. "Where are you? David's worried. Please come home." Instead of replying, I opened my banking app. My stomach twisted as I stared at the meager balance. Every dime I'd earned from years of backbreaking work, every sacrifice I'd made, had gone to them. 3 jobs. No sleep. No future. All for their facade. Another text came through. "We need money for David's school supplies. Can you pick up an extra shift?" I snapped. All the love, loyalty, and guilt I'd carried for them turned into something sharp and unyielding. That's when I decided to dig deeper. It didn't take much digging to uncover the truth. The so-called beach house wasn't rented. They owned it outright. Dad's drunken, aimless act? A cover for his side business as a consultant, which turned out to be highly lucrative. And Mom's MS? A performance so convincing it could have won awards. They had orchestrated everything, feeding me lies to keep their golden goose laying. I sat on that park bench until the sun came up, watching the shadows of my childhood shift into something monstrous. Every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd abandoned, had been for them, for their greed. But I wasn't going to stay their victim. Not anymore. If they'd lied to me, they'd lied to others. I was going to expose every single one of their secrets. I started documenting everything. Every lie. Every hidden bank account. Every fake doctor's appointment. My phone became a treasure trove of evidence. Videos of Mom walking effortlessly when she thought no one was looking, photos of Dad holding court at expensive restaurants while claiming he was at AA meetings. But it was David who delivered the most damning revelation. One night, as I checked on him before bed, he tugged at my sleeve. "Amanda," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I need to tell you something." "What is it, buddies?" I asked, kneeling beside him. His eyes brimmed with tears. "Mom and Dad, they make me lie to you?" My stomach turned. "What do you mean?" Through choked sobs, he confessed everything. How they'd coached him since he was little, teaching him to act like we were poor whenever I was home. How they'd bought him 2 sets of everything, shabby clothes for the house and designer outfits for when they took him to their real life. How they'd promised him a car for his 16th birthday if he kept their secret. "They said it was a game," he cried, "but it's not fun anymore. I hate it, Amanda. I hate watching them hurt you." I hugged him tightly, fighting back my own tears. His words shattered what little illusion I'd been clinging to. This wasn't just about money. It was calculated psychological manipulation, inflicted on both of us. The next morning, for the first time in years, I called in sick to all 3 of my jobs. Instead of going to work, I went to the library, determined to uncover the full extent of their deceit. What I found left me reeling. Dad's consulting business wasn't just lucrative, it was worth millions. They owned properties across multiple states, beach houses, condos, even a cabin in the mountains. Mom's medical records? Spotless. No trace of MS or any other condition. The years of struggle I'd endured were nothing but a farce designed to keep me in the dark. But the real betrayal was buried in old bank records. Large monthly deposits had been coming in from my grandmother's estate, my dad's mother, who had passed away when I was too young to remember her. She'd left her entire fortune to me and David, meant to be ours when we turned 18. I was 20 now. For 2 years, Dad had been funneling my inheritance into his own accounts while I worked myself to exhaustion. That night, Mom called a family meeting. She sat in her wheelchair, the picture of fragile concern. "Amanda, sweetie," she began, her voice dripping with insincerity. "We're worried about you. All this work, it's too much. Why don't you move back home? Let us take care of you." I stared at her, then at Dad, slouched in his chair like a man defeated by life. David sat silently, his eyes downcast. "That's funny," I said, pulling out my phone, "because I've got some concerns too." I tapped the screen, playing the video of Mom standing in the grocery store, laughing and loading expensive groceries into her cart. Their faces drained of color. "How dare you spy on us?" Mom snapped, her syrupy tone gone. "After everything we've done for you?" I laughed bitterly. "Everything you've done for me? You mean stealing my inheritance? Forcing David to lie? Making me work 3 jobs while you lived in luxuries?" Dad straightened, the drunkard act falling away like a discarded mask. "Now listen here." "No," I said sharply, cutting him off. "You listen. I've contacted a lawyer. I have proof of everything, the fraud, the hidden accounts, the fake medical claims. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to the police." That's when Mom did the unthinkable. She stood up from her wheelchair and slapped me across the face. The room went silent. David gasped. Dad's expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "You ungrateful little," Mom began, but I interrupted her. "I've already sent copies of everything to my lawyer," I said, my cheek stinging. "If anything happens to me, it all goes public." Dad's eyes narrowed. "How much?" "Excuse me?" I asked. "How much to make this go away?" he said, his voice measured. "Name your price." I stared at him, disbelief mingling with disgust. "It's not about money anymore. It's about justice." Mom laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that held none of the warmth I'd once known. Justice? Go ahead, tell everyone. See who believes you. We're respected in this community. You're just a waitress who couldn't even finish college. Her words stung, but I refused to back down. Maybe, I said, but I have proof. And by tomorrow, everyone will know who you really are. I turned to leave, but David's voice stopped me. I'm coming with you. Mom's face twisted in rage. You're not going anywhere. Sit down. But David stood, grabbing a backpack he'd packed in secret. He walked over to me, his jaw set in defiance. I'm done lying. As we walked out, Dad's voice followed us. You'll regret this, both of you. We didn't look back, but his words weren't just a threat. What happened next would push us to the brink, testing not just our courage, but our will to survive. The next morning, my lawyer wasted no time. Legal proceedings were set into motion before I even had a chance to process the enormity of it all. Dad, however, struck back with brutal swiftness. He froze every account, including those holding the money I had earned myself. Then came the smear campaign. The local paper ran a headline that screamed, "Heartbroken father betrayed by ungrateful daughter." Friends of my parents in high places ensured the narrative was clear. I was the villain. According to them, I had fabricated lies about a disabled mother and a devoted father. The fallout was immediate. Joe's Diner couldn't handle the bad publicity and let me go. The grocery store cited company policy as their reason for firing me. Even my house-cleaning clients stopped returning my calls. David and I moved into a cheap motel, living off the emergency savings I had painstakingly built over the years. Every dollar felt like a lifeline, but I knew it wouldn't last. What Dad didn't count on, however, was that people talk, and not just about me. Servers, grocery store workers, housekeepers, people who had spent years watching my parents flaunt their wealth, began to step forward. The first was Ruby, a server at the country club. She had a video of Mom playing tennis, her movements fluid and effortless. Next was a landscaper who recalled Dad's frequent trips to the beach house, far from the so-called AA meetings he claimed to attend. Soon, a flood of evidence poured in from people who were tired of watching the wealthy abuse their power. The final blow came from an unexpected source, Dad's longtime secretary, Jessie. "I've kept quiet for 20 years, she told me, handing over a thick folder. But watching them destroy you? I can't stay silent anymore." Inside were documents proving everything: fraud, embezzlement, and years of financial crimes. Dad had been stealing from his clients and using my grandmother's inheritance to cover his tracks. The court case dragged on for months. Every day, Mom and Dad showed up polished and composed, playing the role of heartbroken victims. Meanwhile, I wore the same borrowed suit day after day because it was all I had. David testified with remarkable courage. His voice wavered, but his words cut through the courtroom like a blade. He revealed how Mom had trained him to lie and rewarded his compliance, describing the years of forced deception in painful detail. Medical experts, financial investigators, and a parade of witnesses followed, each one dismantling the carefully constructed lies my parents had built. By the time the trial concluded, their facade had crumbled. The judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. I was awarded my rightful inheritance. Dad was convicted of fraud and embezzlement and led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Mom, while not formally charged, was left with a ruined reputation. As Dad was taken away, Mom grabbed my arm, her face a mask of fury and desperation. "We did it for you," she hissed. "Everything was for you. We wanted you to learn the value of hard work." I looked at her designer dress and flawless manicure and met her gaze with a cold stare. "No," I said. "You did it because you could. Because you thought you'd never get caught. But you taught me something, all right, the value of truth. That was 3 years ago. Today, David is in college studying law. He's determined to help victims of financial abuse like us. I used part of my inheritance to start a business that employs people who need second chances, just like I did." Mom moved to another state after divorcing Dad. Occasionally, she sends cards filled with justifications and apologies, but I don't bother reading them anymore. Dad writes too, though his letters are full of blame and thinly veiled threats. They only serve as a reminder that I made the right choice. Sometimes I visit Joe's Diner and sit at the counter, ordering a coffee and watching the new waitress rush between tables. She doesn't know my story or recognize me from the newspapers. To her, I'm just another customer, someone who tips well and treats her with respect. Last week, while cleaning, I found my old diner uniform. Seeing it brought back memories of exhaustion, fear, and betrayal. But it also reminded me of my strength. I donated it to a women's shelter along with a check big enough to help others escape their own prisons. Because that's the thing about lies. They only thrive in darkness. Once exposed to the light of truth, they wither and die. David and I have a new tradition now. Every Sunday, we volunteer at a financial literacy program, teaching people how to recognize manipulation, understand their rights, and find their voices. You're my hero, David told me recently. Not just for fighting back, but for helping others fight too. But I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who learned the hard way that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about truth, respect, and breaking the cycle of abuse. People often ask if I regret exposing my parents, if the cost was too high. I think about the girl I was, working 3 jobs, sacrificing everything for a lie. Then I look at the life I've built. Honest, purposeful, and free. No, I don't regret it. Some prices are worth paying. And the truth? The truth is priceless.